Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Friend of the channel, Roger Livermore, has written a very long and expansive letter to John Swinney, explaining why there are so many problems with the COVID inquiry. It's sort of in relation to everything that has happened with Leslie Roberts, and don't forget, we're doing the first of two interviews with Leslie today. I'm doing one, the first half, part one, and Craig over on his channel, Craig Houston Talks To, is doing the other half of that interview. As I said before, I'll put a link at the end of my interview so you can go across to him. If you haven't yet subscribe to both channels. It really massively helps to get stuff like this out because people really need to know. Now, I'm going to go through this letter from Roger Livermore. As I say, it's a fairly long one. It's about 5 pages, but I will go through it nonetheless. I think it's important. We'll go through it. But what I'm also going to do, and you can see if you look below, it'll probably be within a couple of minutes of me uploading the video, it will appear. And there'll be a link, pinned comment below. So if you go down to the comments, the very top comment, and I'll pin that, and there'll be a link, and that link will take you to a PDF copy of this letter. So if you want to read it later in your own time, please feel free to do so. But in the meantime, I'm going to go through the letter for you to just be aware of what's going on. So without further ado, let's get in and have a look at Roger's letter. Here goes. So as you see, it's to Lord Brailsford, or not to him, it's about Lord Brailsford, Chair of the Scottish COVID-19 Public Inquiry, resignation for breaches of oath of office. The attention of Scottish First Minister, the Right Honourable John Swinney, MSP. Rarely right, never honourable. Dear Mr. Swinney, 1. COVID-19 Public Inquiry Chairs. You will recall that ASAP NHS was compelled to object to the appointment of Lord Brailsford as the second chair of the Scottish COVID-19 Public Inquiry. You and Scottish First Minister Sturgeon defended the appointment. We had already pointed out that the appointment of the first chair, Lady Poole, was unlawful. One aspect was that Poole had recently been selected for promotion by Scottish First Minister Sturgeon, the person they were then required to pass judgment over the pandemic catastrophe. Lady Poole took the required action and she stood down. It would have been impossible for her to continue. It would have left the inquiry with no credibility whatsoever. Now we have their successor, Brailsford, ensuring that the inquiry is a cover-up and all-round failure. It follows the recent tradition of failed Scottish Government inquiries, the Penrose contaminated blood scandal, the Maclean Vale of Leven Hospital 50 infection deaths. And it appears that the current Lord Brodie's Scottish Hospitals inquiry are all expensive failures. The inquiries are supposed to solve problems to prevent their reoccurrence. Instead, Penrose and Maclean ignored the legislation on dangerous pathogens, and this set the scene for pandemic catastrophes. They carry the blame for not upholding the law as their oath of office required, a common failure in Scottish Government, and the justice system here is the disregard of the law that applies and absence or failures of the regulator or any other checks and balances. See, for comparison, Sir Brian Langstaff's professional infected blood inquiry report and your government's rank amateur Penrose report and its one recommendation. Penrose's cover-up report was justifiably burnt by the families. Note also one of Sir Brian Langstaff's main recommendations with his damning of defensiveness. This is of course the Scottish Government's standard approach to major failures, followed by denials and cover-up. It is an outrageous insult to the people of Scotland. As expected, the failures of Lord Brailsford have become all too obvious. This week they reached a level of absurdity in his handling of the evidence of the retired nurse Leslie Roberts. ASAP NHS has been accumulating the evidence on the main failures. We will return to this as required. To summarise, it currently appears that he has been acting unprofessionally, without regard for a witness, dishonest, deceitful, unlawful, acting with unlawful bias, shielding the Scottish Government that appointed him, part of a government-dependent judiciary, unconstitutional, without the required competencies, failing to uphold the applicable law, for example, HSWA 1974, MHSSWR 1999, COSH 2002, PPE regulations, RIDDOR. In major breaches of his oath of office, the Promissory Oaths Act 1868, and on a technicality, his appointment as a senior judge was and is unlawful. 2. Witness interference. The evidence of Leslie Roberts is critical to the inquiry. She uniquely covers the frontline failures during the pandemic, the homicidal policies of the Scottish Government, and the law that applies to the prevention and control of dangerous pathogens, the pandemic. As Brailsford has sought to suppress this evidence, we attach a version of it, which the inquiry does not have. We circulate it and provide to Dame Heather Hallett and the UK inquiry. Brailsford and his staff have been obstructive of this evidence. They sat on reports for weeks before sending that back with vital parts removed, then giving just a couple of days to redo the extensive statement. This made things very difficult for Miss Roberts. It would for anyone. Brailsford was being extremely unreasonable. It was such that understandably she wondered whether it was worth it. The timescales were impossible for anyone. You could tell Brailsford and his staff were not competent. Note Brailsford's statements, both written and oral, were not under oath, thereby further undermining the credibility of the statutory public inquiry. If there is a mistake to be made, it will make it. It is looking like a model of how not to do a public inquiry. The last few days, it seems that the Brailsford has lost leave of his senses and acted unlawfully. 17th of May 2024 witness update, and this is what was sent. Following Leslie Roberts' announcement on social media yesterday, 16th of May, that she no longer intends to give evidence at the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry, its chair, Lord Brailsford, has withdrawn his invitation to her to appear at a public hearing. The independent inquiry has always been keen to receive evidence from Leslie Roberts relevant to its terms of reference, and it will ensure the signed written statements she has provided will inform its investigations. He's lying. This is Brailsford lying and spying and acting unlawfully. Leslie did not say that she would not give evidence. She wrote on her social media of her frustration with Brailsford messing about, his trying to make it difficult or near impossible to give evidence. Leslie did not say to the inquiry that she had resigned. It was a lie for Brailsford to say that she had resigned when she had not. He unlawfully obtained information without the data subject's consent. He unlawfully held, used and transmitted personal information on the website. That this information all without Leslie's consent. Further, under the Data Protection Act, it was required that she could correct Brailsford's lie. This is despicable and unlawful behaviour by Brailsford. It also seems to involve multiple breaches of the Data Protection Act 2018 and the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR. The behaviour of Brailsford warrants independent, lawful investigation. Given the very serious matters of the statement, then, as a start, this should be investigated by the UK's Information Commissioner's Office. But as it is statutory law, it should be investigated by an external police force. The exemptions in the DPA do not seem to apply. 3. Press and other government interference. The issues raised by Leslie Roberts have received coverage in certain areas. As you know, on the 12th of May 2024, the Scottish Daily Express published another article on this, both in print and online. This was not Leslie's statement to the public inquiry. Her statement was not completed or sent to Brailsford until the morning of Friday the 17th of May 2024. However, on or around the 15th of May 2024, the Express was contacted by whom? And pressure applied to remove the article. There was reportedly no injunction served on the Express, nor apparently in law could there be one. The Express removed the article from its website. The statement is Leslie Roberts. It is not Brailsford's. Neither the inquiry nor the Scottish Government, for example, Lord Advocate Bain, or those acting on their behalf or on your behalf, should be interfering. There could be a breach of ECHR Article 10, which would be a very serious repercussions for those involved. If Scottish First Ministers such as Lord Advocates Bain and Wolfe, or their staff in COPs have been interfering with what must be an independent public inquiry, there will be all hell to pay. 4. Corporate homicide. As you know, your SNP Minister, Lord Advocate Bain, is currently unlawfully obstructing the ASAP NHS case against your government. She has been doing this with the collusion of Chief Constables Livingston and Farrell. Bain lied to Holyrood on the 16th of January 2024 by stating that her COPS was an independent prosecution service, when of course it is entirely the SNP Scottish Government's completely unlawful prosecution service. That is the end of Bain in government. They have no credibility whatsoever. Brailsford demonstrated his unlawful bias by completely banning ASAP NHS from being part of the Scottish inquiry. That was juvenile behaviour. It is ASAP NHS that has systematically pointed out what the law requires on the prevention and control of a pandemic, how the Scottish Government failed to do so, and thereby what needs to be done to prevent and or control the next pandemic. This is exactly what the inquiry should be dealing with. See the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007, case attached. Brailsford is a peak of irresponsibility. ASAP NHS and the legal points it highlighted must be part of the Scottish COVID-19 public inquiry, otherwise you can guarantee that it will be another expensive failure. The prosecution case points out the law that applies and what it requires. I initiated GB-wide policy on the law and infection control. I enforce the law in healthcare and social care, NHS nursing homes. In Scotland, the law on infection control is almost totally absent. I secured the inclusion of COSH in the international reference, the Royal Marsden Manual of Clinical Nursing Procedures, and without this law, the inquiry is doomed. 5. Scotland's unlawful justice system. As you well know, Scotland does not have a lawful criminal justice system. It has not had one since devolution. Instead of the legally required independent judicial processes, Scotland's are run and controlled by the government of the day. As you and your government head the prosecution system, our current SNP government is outside the constraints of the law. It is free to ignore the law, and it does this on patient safety, 2,000 deaths a year, maternity safety, 100 baby deaths a year, and the pandemic, many thousands of deaths. Since the Ultra Vires Scotland Act 1998, there has not been the separation of the powers nor the rule of law. The system of government, justice, the judiciary and policing have all been unlawful under overarching law. European Convention on Human Rights, Human Rights Act 1998, Constitutional Reform Act 2005, Judiciary and Court Scotland Act 2008 and by common law. The whole Scottish legal profession believes that it is unlawful for the Scottish Government under the Scottish First Minister to run the prosecution system and to decide who gets prosecuted and who does not. Likewise, it decides on what to do, if anything, on deaths. No coroner system or equivalent. The profession thinks that it is acceptable for the government to control most of the evidence in courts, to have a government-dependent judiciary, to have a police force constantly having the government unlawfully interfering. This is a legal profession that would have been at ease in 1930s Germany. It has gone along with this illegality and madness. For 25 years, the profession has been up the proverbial gum tree. When this gets known outside Scotland, the legal profession here will be known as a laughing stock. The Scottish COVID-19 inquiry is another example of the absence of law and the total failure of the Scottish justice system. It is the total boiled frog syndrome. The frog is well and truly dead, and so too legally is the Scottish justice system. It needs to be placed into special measures as an emergency case. The immediate action is to dispense with the services of Lord Brailsford, a symptom of an illegal and bankrupt system. His bungling of the shielding of your government could be akin to the Watergate burglars. From here, everything unravels. Much as it tries, your government cannot control all the media all the time. Yours truly, Craig Preston. Brailsford has now banned both Leslie Roberts and ASAP NHS from giving evidence. He is adopting a Putin-esque approach to evidence that highlights your government's homicidal actions regarding the pandemic. As Scottish First Minister, you have the ability and the requirement to appoint a new chair. This will need to be done by someone not contaminated by the Scottish justice system. Given the obvious boiled frog syndrome, the new chair must be from someone outside of Scotland. 6. Inquiry conclusions. The Scottish Government, its ministers and its direct report NHS Scotland's failed and refused to comply with the UK legislation on the prevention and control of hazard group 4 or 3 dangerous pathogens. HSWA 1974, MHSWR 1999, COSH 2002, PPE Regs 1992 and RIDDOR. It has disregarded the repeated warnings from ASAP NHS and the repeated personal warnings from Roger Livermore since early 2012, right up to the 29th of February 2020. Breaches of HSWA Sections 2, 3 Part 1, 7, 36, 37, etc. HSE, the statutory regulator of government, healthcare and social care in Scotland, by Section 18 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, failed and refused to uphold and enforce the legislation. My apologies. Breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act Sections 3 Part 1, 7, 36 and 37, and HSE ignored the warnings from ASAP NHS, as it will. 6.3. The Scottish Government did not have the legally required plan nor the statutory means to control a pandemic involving a hazard 3 or 4 dangerous pathogen. Its National Infection Prevention and Control Manual NIPCM from 2012 onwards, disregards the legislation. It did not comply and it did not cover such a pathogen. Following NIPCM would spread SARS-CoV-2 and would create death traps. See HSWA Section 2, 3 Part 1 and MHSWR Regulation 5, etc. The Scottish Government and its NHS Scotland did not have the legally required competent advice. Instead, it had a National Clinical Director, Jason Leach, a dentist, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Catherine Calderwood, an obstetrician, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Gregor Smith, a GP, the part-time Chief Scientific Advisor, an astrophysicist. The legal advisors to the Scottish Government, Lord Advocates Wolf and Bain, had no competence in the legislation that applies to the pandemic, breaching Health and Safety at Work Act Section 2 and Section 3 Part 1 and the MHSWR Section 7. The Scottish judiciary fails to uphold the law on dangerous pathogens. See Penrose Contaminated Blood Inquiry 2015. The McLean Vale of Leyland Hospital Inquiry 2014 with 50 patient infection deaths both ignored the law. The judiciary never takes cases on the biggest single causes of death related to work activities. The Scottish judiciary is not competent in HSWA. This is a breach of Promissory Oaths Act 1868. The legal framework of the Scottish Government, its agency, its acts, Holyrood and its legislation is reserved law and by the ECHR. Owing to the overarching reserved law, the Scotland Act 1988 being ultra vires, null and void, the operation of the aforementioned have no legal basis. This is by reserved law. It is not compliant with the European Convention on Human Rights, and the separation of the powers and the rule of law have been absent since devolution day on the 1st of July 1999. Yours sincerely, Roger M. Livermore. He's really giving it to them. Everything is illegal. Even the COVID inquiry itself is outside the competencies of the Scottish government. And they are banning people who want to say things that they don't like. I'll stop there. I'm not even going to come up. I'm just going to finish here. I'll leave that there. If you want to have a look at it, please look. And as I say, I've pinned the link in the first comment below. Thank you very much.